So how many soldiers from Ireland do you think fought in World War One?
About 500,000.
And how many would you say died?
About 400,000.
How many would you say from Ireland died in World War One?
About 10,000 maybe.
I honestly wouldn't have a clue.
Like 25,000?
I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 of them.
And how many would you say died?
Maybe half of them.
Just over 200,000 on it.
200 maybe?
I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000.
I'd say a few thousand, tens of thousands, I'd say.
This started back in 2015 with me researching a deceased World War I soldier from my home county Offaly in Ireland. In Ireland, World War I soldiers have essentially been written out of history, and many people don't know the role they had in World War I. There was 45,000 men from Ireland died in World War I, more than the Irish Civil War, War of Independence and the 1916 Rising combined. And there was 200,000 men from Ireland fought in World War I. But I don't want these men to just be statistics. I want us to remember them as humans and the sacrifice they made for Ireland, for their family and for their religion back 100 years ago. Right now in Ireland, we're in exceptionally strange times. The whole world is on lockdown.
We're in the middle of a global and national emergency.
Today, as the world faces the global spread of the coronavirus.
All over the world, we're seeing the devastating impact of this invisible killer.
Cabinet met this afternoon to assess the rapidly evolving situation relating to COVID-19.
Por segunda vez, el estado de alarma, el 12 de abril, hasta las 24 horas del sábado 25 de abril.
All of this reminds me of a story I encountered while researching this documentary. A story of a soldier from Northern Ireland who had survived World War I, but 10 days after the end of the war, he died because of the Spanish flu.
There was the catastrophe of 1918, when an influenza epidemic swept through our own nation, as well as the entire world. Unlike the battles of nation against nation, or humanity against the forces of nature, when man is...
Today things aren't so different. All of Ireland is on lockdown. Unfortunately, that has impacted the shape of this documentary. I was obviously hoping to interview many of the people in this documentary in person and get them to tell me some of the tragic and personal stories of Irish World War I soldiers, men who've been forgotten from the Irish history books. People think it's not right to remember these soldiers that they fought for the British Crown. In this, I'll be doing my best to tell the stories of the Irish World War I soldiers, why they were forgotten, and what happened to them when they returned home, and what we can do now to remember them.
It's one aspect of Irish history that's kind of been forgotten about over the years.
We started at Home Rule, and it went from Home Rule to 1916, that was it.
You only really learn about the 1916 stuff.
Didn't like the thought of Irish soldiers fighting for Britain.
He's one of the 73,000 missing of the song.
I was the first person to ever visit his grave.
That he also had a younger brother, James, who went to war with him and had only been 15 and had lied about his age.
And they came back to find that, they were sort of ostracised.
You don't really learn enough about the people who actually fought in World War I.
He died when he was 15 during the Battle of the Somme.
One of 1 million people that died in that battle.
My great-grandfather fought in the war. He was injured, he came back.
A lot of the soldiers who did die were our age.
Now when I think about it, it still makes me upset, especially because I'm 21 now, so I'm exactly the same age as him.
When they come back home, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to relive it.
In 2015, I researched Lieutenant John MacDonald Bradley, a soldier from Offaly in Ireland that had died of wounds in the Battle of the Somme. He was one of 1 million people that died in that battle. I realised he'd been orphaned at a young age, and I was the first person to ever visit his grave when I went over to visit in 2015. I realised just how much Irish World War I soldiers had been written out of history.
It's the very first time that students from the island of Ireland, north, south, boys, girls, Catholics, Protestants, are joining together on a history project to remember and commemorate the sacrifices of soldiers.
Get back congratulating all of you who've been selected to take part in this most important initiative. And I think it was quite original and innovative and a very good idea to pick a student from each county in Ireland to visit the Somme this summer. And I think as well, the idea to pay tribute to a soldier from the county of the students who had lost their lives during the First World War was quite an inspirational idea. It gives a genuine recognition of the importance of restoring people who've been excluded from history back into history. Now see that there are stories to be recovered, there are lives to be respected, and your capacity to engage with the individual story of your own adopted soldier and effectively writes that soldier back into history.
Everyone in Ireland probably in some way has a relation that fought from Ireland in World War I. And it's important that we realise the role Ireland played in World War I. There was 35 men from Ireland won the Victoria Cross for bravery, yet many had some tragic stories.
For example, there's a man from Donegal who won the Victoria Cross. His name is James Duffy, and he survived the war, and he literally ended a life in poverty. And he even sold his Victoria medal just to make money. And he was actually beaten up in Letterkenny because they found out that he was in the First World War. So he was considered sort of a traitor. Nearly 200,000 Irish were in the war, but quite a number of them came home to a very, very different Ireland. So obviously in the intervening years, you had the War of Independence and you had the atrocities of the Black and Tans, which meant that anyone who wore a uniform was looked upon nearly as a traitor.
I took part on the My Adopted Soldier trip when I was in 5th year and representing Kerry. My soldier that I had to research was called Charles Francis Conway, and he died when he was 15 during the Battle of the Somme. Trying to get information was kind of a dead end really with the census. When I couldn't find anything through that, but when I did find his family, one of the family members had done research on him, quite in-depth research, and because they were family members they got more information from the archives. So they had found newspaper clippings of when he was accosted by a policeman for flicking matches on a street corner or something, as a young boy just messing. They found articles about him then. I remember visiting my soldier's grave and I was very, very emotional when I actually saw it. It just sort of hit me all of a sudden. It was just, I saw his name there and I saw on his headstone it says died age 17, but that was incorrect. He was 15.
So he lied about his age?
He gave a false age, yeah. My great-grandfather fought in the war. He was injured, he came back. And his brothers were very Republican while he was away at the war. I mean, they were on the side of the leaders of the Rising. So when he came back, there was tension. But I've never felt the need to... I mean, they were Irish soldiers. They went over for whatever reason it might have been. They were there to fight for money, or if they weren't, they might have been fighting for the crown. But they were there for their own reasons. And I don't think it's fair to just sort of discard them. My great-grandfather actually fought in the same battalion as the soldier that I had to research for the My Adopted Soldier project. So they were in the same battalion of the Royal Munster Fusiliers, and they were from the same town as well. So chances are they may have known each other, even though there was an age gap of about 10 years. And he was injured in the Battle of Ypres. So they had wire clippers for the wires in the trenches, and the clippers were left out in no man's land, but they were kind of a precious resource at the time. My grandfather, he crawled out in his stomach to get the wire clippers, and anyway, a bomb was set off, a mine was set off, and he was injured with shrapnel in his thigh. So he always walked with a limp afterwards, so he was discharged and he came back home to Tralee then.
If I was around 100 years ago, there's so a good chance I would have fought in World War I. Being from a farm in County Offaly, like many others, I would have joined to fight for economic reasons, or maybe to try to secure home rule for Ireland, like many did.
Everything changed after 1916. The reality is that before, in 1914, the majority of Irish nationalists were voting for home rule, which still was going to keep the connection with Britain.
There are many great Irish men today who feel that out of this war, we should try to build up a new Ireland. The trouble is, men are so timid about meeting each other halfway. Had poor Kettle lived, he would have given the world a wonderful account of things out here. I saw a good deal of Kettle, and we had many talks of the unity we had both hoped would come out of this war.
You know, if you look in history as to why they went in the first place, the majority of Irish men who joined the First World War did not go for king and country. That meant nothing to them. They went, a lot of them, because it was an economic necessity. Why do you think all the Dublin Fusiliers, lots and lots of them went? Last year, I had a group of students in my classroom doing research. One of the boys in my class came across a soldier from Dublin, and he said there has to be a mistake here, because the soldier, his census record showed that he was living in a house in Dublin in which there was 68 people living in it. It was an overcrowded slum, and that man joined the army in 1914 simply because it was a job. Then you have other people who joined the war because their priests, their bishops, actually told them at Mass that to go and join to defend poor, defenceless Catholic Belgium. Also, their politicians like John Redmond told them to go because they would guarantee them home rule. So they were the motivating factors. And to me, the economic one was really, really important.
And even prior to that, before the famine, I think there was the highest proportion of people in the British Army were Irish at one point.
Yeah, they were huge. Even if you look at the War of Independence in America, the amount of Irish soldiers, and the very first St. Patrick's Day celebration in New York City was Irish soldiers based there before the War of Independence. Redcoats.
There was propaganda created nearly around this whole myth of the Irish soldier being way braver than every other soldier in World War One. But that was, I don't know what the basis is for that. Like, I think it was to try and enlist more Irish soldiers when enlistment was dying off a bit.
They deliberately zoomed in on a man called O'Leary from County Cork, who was an extremely highly decorated soldier. And he was used in posters with that whole image of the brave Irish man to inspire other Irish men to join up. He definitely got the Victoria Cross, highly, highly decorated. But yeah, that was definitely one of the images, the tough Irish man.
Because it's a forgotten part of history, and it's especially sad when you see men that went over there under the premise of getting home rule. They were told, you know, if you go and fight for Britain in World War One, there's a better chance of home rule, and then they came back to find that, you know, they were sort of ostracized.
And my first soldier didn't actually work out because I visited this local historian in Longford, and he just couldn't find anything on the guy that I'd been given. There was just nothing, and I was really kind of disheartened by that because I didn't want to give up on someone, especially when there was nothing there. I was kind of like, this is so sad because I feel like he's just lost now. So that was kind of disheartening. And then I got this other guy, John Mallon, and I was so delighted because I found a relative belonging to him. So he died in the war at 21, and I basically got to meet his great grandniece. And she was so curious about it because she didn't really know very much about him, or she knew that he had died, and that was pretty much it. Because she said that this had given her kind of a sense of meaning or a bit of hope. Just, she said it brought her closer to her family, and she was telling her sisters about it, and they followed my whole journey really closely. So I found out about her granduncle or great granduncle who died in the war, which was my soldier, and actually by extension ended up finding out that he also had a younger brother, James, who went to war with him and had only been 15 and had lied about his age. And he went with John, and actually he survived. So he came home, but he actually got discharged because he lied about his age. He never talked about the war or about his brother. Amazing to find out that they'd gone together. And I think it really struck home with me because I'm very close to my siblings as well. So I was kind of imagining, how could he talk about it? It made so much sense to me that I just don't think I would ever be able to either. And yeah, so I kind of had both of those men in my head when I went over. I was always thinking of his younger brother nearly as much as him, just I was thinking of their journey together and going over, and you know, were they together the day he died, or had they seen each other? Were they in separate places? And that was always in my mind. And how did James find out that John had died, or I don't know, and had he been discharged beforehand? I never found out any of that stuff, but it was a really, really sad story for me, and I definitely, even now when I think about it, it still makes me upset, especially because I'm 21 now, so I'm exactly the same age as him. And I just think it's so surreal. It still is that they were our age and that happened. And I suppose we're so lucky in a way that we can actually appreciate now, I suppose, the severity of it. When you look at, we were quite detached from the war in terms of at home. I think people didn't really understand it or understand what these guys were going through. And they were wrapped up in what was going on in the country at the time, so the politics of the time, trying to stray away from English, I suppose, culture and tradition.
They were Irish soldiers. They went over for whatever reason it might have been. They were there to fight for money, or if they were, they might have been fighting for the crown. But they were there for their own reasons, and I don't think it's fair to just sort of discard them. It was the security of having money and having a job. I mean, young boys then as well, of course, are going to think of it as an adventure, having never left the country before. They go to a different country, to this brand new country, brand new experience. When you're coming from such a small town where the same thing happens and everybody knows everybody, it seems like a massive adventure. And I suppose then you can have a sort of sense of, I'm fighting for my country, I'm fighting for the king. Of course that played a role with some soldiers, but you can't paint it as all that they were fighting for the throne. In reality, you need to put yourself in the shoes of these people back during that time.
A blackbird singing on a moss-upholstered stone, bluebells swinging, shadows wildly blown, a song in the wood, a ship on the sea. The song was for you and the ship was for me.
Why do you feel it was necessary to write these soldiers back into history?
I just think definitely that it was a part of Irish history that was forgotten about, even in the Leaving Cert course and in the Junior Cert. Well, let's start with the Junior Cert course that was redesigned in the early 1990s. First World War got 2 paragraphs mention and very, very little for any Irish mention. Whereas at least in the new Junior Cert course, teachers now have the option of doing World War I and the Irish input into it in depth. So like definitely didn't even feature in the history textbooks. Leaving Cert, hardly anything mention of the Irish involvement in the First World War, which is a huge, huge omission. But like when you consider the amount of Irish who died in the First World War, no, I just think it's a part of history that was totally neglected and forgotten about. But thankfully in the last 5 years or so, there's a whole new interest in it. And as I said, it's now been incorporated into both Leaving Cert and Junior Cert history. And like even if you look at some of the workbooks that they're using, which makes me quite proud of the fact that they're actually getting students now to use My Adopted Soldier website.
In my mind, I was thinking, well, thank God there's never going to be a war again, or thank God nothing like this will ever happen. And I suppose that was a bit of naivety there, because in my mind, at that age I just thought World War I was so far away from me and so in the past. And now I think when you grow up a little bit and you actually look around and you realise things like this are still happening all over the world, like on a minor scale, but there is wars going on and there is horrific things going on that we choose to kind of ignore because we're a little bit desensitized and the media kind of gives us, I don't know, curtailed versions of things. But definitely I think now as a grown-up looking back, I'm kind of like, oh my God, these things do happen and life is actually really, really scary sometimes. And even like looking at this, like the whole world is on standstill for an indefinite period of time and nobody foresaw that coming ahead, and you're kind of forced to sit and think and be with your family and I suppose not get wrapped up in all the other things.
France, September 8, 1916. If I live, I mean to spend the rest of my life working for perpetual peace. I have seen war and faced modern artillery and know what an outrage it is against simple men.
We are moving up tonight into the Battle of the Somme. The bombardment, destruction and bloodshed are beyond all imagination. Nor did I ever think the valour of simple men could be quite as beautiful as that of my Dublin Fusiliers. I've had 2 chances of leaving them. One on sick leave and one to take a staff job. I have chosen to stay with my comrades.
In the time since, a change for people your own age in remembrance of soldiers, or would you think it's something that still needs to be worked out?
I think it's the whole, I suppose the whole perception of Britain and Ireland at the moment is kind of, in young Irish people anyway, there's a bit of tension there, I think. But I would hope, especially with the centenary coming up, that, wearing the Irish poppy isn't seen as something negative. It's because it's so important to remember Irish soldiers who went to war there. But it's just kind of, I suppose it's balancing our past with Britain and remembering history in the right way, making sure we remember World War I, because it's a forgotten part of history. I think as well it's about educating people over in Britain about some of the struggles that we've gone through as well.
Yeah.
It's easy to paint them all with the same brush, that they're all anti-Irish and they don't understand maybe the tension on the border.
Working class Irishmen from Dublin, every part of Ireland, farmers' sons from Offaly, farmers' sons from Donegal, young men from Leeds who worked in factories, who were promised to be kept together with all their pals. They all suffered and died in the battlefields, and they were all the same. And I think one of the really poignant things for me, the very first time I ever went to the Somme, was when I visited a grave in a cemetery called Guillemont. And when you walk into that cemetery, one of the graves on the left is the British Prime Minister's son, Raymond Asquith, who was buried there. And his grave is the same as the man from Cork who is buried 5 away from him. Death was a great leveller.
Ireland was definitely a changed place following World War I. I think it's time we reevaluate our attitude towards World War I soldiers from Ireland and realise the sacrifice they made was as justifiable as the sacrifice those men made in the 1916 Rising and in the War of Independence. They might be seen as traitors, but they definitely are not traitors. They are simply Irish men who went over to do their best for their families, who went over for adventure, who went over to secure home rule for Ireland. Who are we to judge them? All we can do is try to remember them now